Hello, this is Hamlet, and this is my Goal Challenge Mode guide to Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. This is one of the easier challenge modes. It's generally linear with a few interesting minor variations in how you can make your mob count, which I'll discuss along the way. It starts with a long hallway with only one pack of 3 mobs. The Bone Mender, most importantly, has a heal called Shadow Mend, which you can use to heal the 2 skeletons. Make sure to have 2 people interrupting that in alternation. He also casts Shadow Bolts, which you can interrupt if you feel like. It also does some minor party damage and a dispellable dot, which is easy enough to deal with. The skeletons themselves don't do that much interesting, just an occasional cleave. All in all, the only real thing to watch out for on that pack is some significant tank damage. While you're running up to this intersection, take a look at which side the void spawn is at or moving towards, and go the other way. The 2 sides are identical, so you just go whichever one is most convenient. You also may have seen another void spawn despawning just as we are pulling that pack. If it's there, just wait a few seconds for it to despawn before aggroing the 4 pull with the Loyalist and the 3 spirits. The only interesting thing to watch for on the Loyalist is this slow-moving orb that it casts. You can see it coming out right here. Make sure they're ranged and everyone dodges that. Otherwise, none of the 4 mobs have any interesting abilities, so you're just going to be watching for tank damage. While we were pulling that, I ran ahead a few extra yards and shot one of the small spiderlings just to pull that AoE pack in to be AoE'd for free while we were killing off this 4 pull. After that, regardless of whether you went left or right before, you're going to jump through the hole. Remember to dismiss any pets if you do, and then turn back towards the west to get to the entrance to the boss. Make sure you don't get turned around because you're either going to be here or in the mirror image of this spot, depending on which way you jumped. As soon as you jump down, pick up this other pack of skitterlings and run with it to aggro the next Bone Mender pack. This is the same as the one at the start of the zone, except there are 3 ritual bones now. All the considerations are the same. The most important thing is interrupting the heal, but the tank damage will be somewhat higher. That's really all that you're going to be focusing on as you deal with these first few trash packs. If you didn't pull any void spawns, then you're going to have 11 after killing this pack going into the Sadhana Blood Fury encounter. I mentioned there's some variation in what you do with mob count, but it's generally not worth it to pull a void spawn because they're big annoying mobs. It's generally good to get the Bone Mender down first in these pulls and then finish off the 3 skeletons. Once this pack is down, whichever side you're coming from, you're going to go to the west side of Sadhana's room, which is the entrance. She's generally a very controlled boss if you have a plan for positioning and a plan for the adds. It's also a good fight for getting a great DPS burst. It's going to be the first time we use Bloodlust in all our major cooldowns. The way we generally position for Sadhana is all in a clump at the outer edge. One of her abilities is that she periodically drops 3 daggers onto people, which remain and do a very small radius AoE for the rest of the encounter. So if everyone simply moves as a clump right before they drop, we can otherwise ignore them. Another important ability she has is called Death Spike. It's a buff she puts on herself, and while it's up, her next 3 melees will do a substantial amount of added shadow damage to the tank. The tank generally has to know to watch for that or have an alert for it and use their AM, and the healer should generally have an eye on it as well. She periodically summons one of these adds that starts across the platform and rapidly moves towards her. It can be stunned and snared. Your choice is to either kill it or to stun and snare it sufficiently that it doesn't reach her before the Dark Communion channel runs out. If it reaches her, it heals her substantially and gives her a buff, which is a huge disaster. We stunned it with Leg Sweep and Binding Shot and snared it with Frost Trap, which was sufficient to not have to kill it. When she does Dark Eclipse, you have to touch one of the white runes before the end of the channel, just like Heroic. It's worth noting the buff you get lasts for 8 seconds regardless, so if your tank touches it right at the end of the channel, they basically get this free major damage cooldown. And you just saw her final ability, Whispers of the Dark Star, which is huge unavoidable raid-wide damage. Your healer will probably use a major cooldown for this. This is the second ad coming out. Again, we stunned it and expired it and finished her off. Something important about those ads is that oddly enough, they count for mob count. And like I mentioned, there are some variances in how you might make your mob count in this zone, so it might be a reasonable strategy to kill them for that reason, to get 1 or 2 extra free mob kills if you need them. Coming up in this hallway is 3 pairs of enslavers and subjugated souls. The enslavers buff the subjugated souls, and they also cast a spell called Rending Void Lash, a channel that does a huge amount of magic damage to a single target. It can actually kill a party member if you let it do a full channel on them, anyone other than the tank. If you're going to pull all 3 of these pairs together, expect to use a large number of cooldowns. Here we used Grasp and then controlled them with a bunch of AoE stuns. You may also be able to get by with coordinated individual interrupts and stuns. You can also pull the first two pairs and then pull the third one separately or with an Exhumer. In any case, when fighting Enslavers, the important thing is to have everyone focus on stopping Rending Voidlash. Something you could consider is skipping those 6 mobs with Invis rather than the 4 mobs that we skip later, depending on which pull you find harder. Now, when you pull a Shadowmoon Exhumer, like our tank is about to do right here, the first thing they do when aggroed is that cast Exhume the Crypts, and if it goes off, it awakens all of the nearby ghosts from those purple glowing piles on the ground. So what you want to do is always aggro an Exhumer and then immediately do something that's going to stop it, either a stun or a knockback or grip, or alternatively pull it with something like grip and then stun it as it starts the cast. Basically just be ready for it because you don't want them to awaken extras. Regardless of whether you do that Exhumer correctly though, you can't avoid getting one ghost because you have to walk over the pile here, so we just charge right in and take that ghost into the Nolish encounter. If you hook around a little bit to the right like we just did, you can avoid aggroing another one at the start of the fight. We're just going to leave this Exhumed Spirit on the tank and completely ignore it while we focus on Nolish. It will just fall over to incidental damage eventually. It's not really a big deal. The first thing Nolish does is that Void Blast, a channeled cone on the tank. The tank has to always watch where it's aiming and probably mitigate it. Then the boss does this Void Vortex where he jumps to someone and channels this AoE, which also sucks in nearby people. It does a surprisingly tame amount of damage for a challenge mode boss ability. People who can get out of it easily definitely should, but your tank and melee can easily consider staying in, especially with minor cooldowns, to continue DPSing. When he soul shifts everyone has to kill their own possessed soul, including the healer. The possessed souls take increased damage from nature and holy to make it easy for healers as well, and then every person should click their possessed soul to pop back out into the real world. When you do that, you get a substantial buff to your damage and healing that lasts for 20 seconds, and so this is the part of the fight where everyone wants to use their 3-minute cooldowns and similar things, and potions that should be back up from using them on Sadhana. His final ability is this, Void Devastation. He throws these orbs through the air. They do quite a lot of damage and everyone has to dodge them. It's simply something to watch for. While you're moving around for all these various abilities, you want to make sure not to step on one of the piles and aggro an Exhumed Spirit. Be especially careful coming out of shift because you can't see them while you're in there. Also be careful while running up to the trash pack after the boss that nobody steps on any, but if you stay on the main path, you should be fine. The trash pull coming up after this is similar to what we fought in the previous hallway. It's 2 Enslaver subjugated soul pairs and 1 Exhumer. How easy it is really depends on how well you handle the special abilities of the Enslavers and Exhumer. Pulling the Exhumer properly so that his Exhume gets interrupted and he doesn't pull adds is important, and then you immediately want to get the Enslavers under control. We used all our AoE stuns here in the usual rotation and had people continue to focus on keeping Rending Voidlash cast stopped. If you get most of those casts stopped and you don't have Exhumed Spirits added in, this pack is actually surprisingly tame. As always when fighting Enslaver packs, just get the Enslavers down quickly so you don't have to worry about those casts and the subjugated souls lose their buffs. There's a patrolling Exhumer near here. If you follow our route, you'll pull it for mob count purposes. It's just an Exhumer on its own. The only interesting part about it is making sure that you handle pulling it correctly while you're already dealing with fighting the other packs so that you don't pick up extra adds. If you don't want to fight this Exhumer, what you can generally do is wait till it wanders off onto the right until it's out of the way and then CC it, or just simply finish off the pack and then use a hard CC on the Exhumer and run by it. Either way is good. While we're running down this long slope towards the next pack, I'll mention that if you're really trying to save seconds in a challenge mode, something you can do is use a glider anytime you're running down a ramp. If you can find a spot where you can glide for a few seconds, it moves forward faster than running. We didn't wind up breaking them out here, but it could definitely be something to consider. The timing in this zone can be a little bit tight. So in addition to the familiar pile of skitterlings, this pack shows you your first monstrous Corp Spider and 2 Plague Bats. Corp Spiders have 2 casts, Necrotic Burst and Death Venom. The really important one to interrupt is Death Venom. It does a huge amount of damage to the tank, roughly 200,000, and you pretty much can't let it go off, or you have to be very ready with a big cooldown. Necrotic Burst does some damage to the party, but it's not that hard to heal off since there isn't anything else hitting them. Now, there's a popular skip off of this platform onto the bridge below. There's an invisible wall that prevents you from simply jumping down onto the bridge with the two bone worms that we're going to be at in a couple minutes, but with a warlock you can use a portal to portal yourself onto the ledge, which gets you through the invisible wall to jump down. It skips this next pack of two Corp Spiders that we're about to fight. It's pretty popular in groups of the warlock, although really not a big deal since we wound up killing these two for mob count and shaving off the mob count elsewhere. Like I mentioned, this pack is two monstrous Corp Spiders, so the only interesting issue here is interrupting the death venom. Make sure you have that carefully coordinated. A few more necrotic bursts will go off and your healer will just have to deal with it, but it shouldn't be a very hard pack. If you do skip these two, then you're going to have to make up the two mobs elsewhere, for example by killing two ads during Sadhana, like I mentioned. Once you have these two down, you're going to be at the entrance to the bridge I mentioned a minute ago. Just to your right is another pack of two Corp Spiders that you didn't actually see right there, but they're just in a little alcove to the right. There's no reason to pull them. On this bridge are two large worms and a flying pack of 4 plague bats. We're going to AoE down the 4 bats while fighting the 2 consecutive worms. So our tank runs up and aggroes the first worm. Everyone has to start looking out for body slam, which you can see right there. It goes in a random direction, so just look out for it. Carrion worms don't do anything else of interest. They'll submerge at 30% and then rejoin you during the boss fight. There are the 4 plague bats, which we pulled in and got some stuns on as we started fighting them. Now, I didn't really describe plague bats before. The only important thing they do is stack a disease on the tank. It's pretty significant, 6,000 every 2 seconds stacking up to 5, so when it's at a full stack, it's a substantial amount of ongoing tank damage. If your healer can dispel diseases, great. They should do that on cooldown pretty much anytime you have plague bats going because it stacks up pretty fast. If not, if you're healing with a druid or shaman, then hopefully you have a priest, paladin, or monk DPS like we do here. If you do, you should make sure that they're set up with their UI and keybinds and everything else to dispel on cooldown. If you don't have any of those things, you're pretty much just going to have to heal through the extra tank damage. The disease will be at 5 stacks pretty much anytime you're fighting a plague bat. This carrion worm will also submerge at 30%, and then you're set to move on to get ready to fight Bone Maw. We're going to pre-pot Bone Maw and use all the DPS cooldowns we have, but we're not going to second pot him because in our route we invis right after this. We would like to Bloodlust for Bone Maw. It's the fight that would most benefit from being ended quickly, but you see we're still sated from using it at Sadhana, and in fact a lot of times we were a little faster and we'd have over a minute here, so we just have to use it at Ner Zhul. But you still want to get as much of a burst as possible on him. Like it said, all our cooldowns pre-pots. I use Heart of the Wild here. You can get him well under 50% for the first inhale if you get a really good burst, and that helps a lot because he doesn't have his ads up before the first inhale. So while you're dealing with his body slam, his random target spit that does about 90,000, and putting down the corpse piles, you can see we leave him here at about medium range so that melee don't have to run too far. They can stay in until inhale actually starts, then quickly make it back to a pile. Having them closer would still probably have been good, but the range can at least stand still in a pile the entire time in DPS. Healing through it isn't too hard. People should just get out of it when it's over. So we have him at 30% when the ads are going to pop out of the ground right during this first body slam. Know that that first body slam is going to be a triple and always be ready to dodge it. Other than that, the big issue with having 3 enemies up is that there are now 3 of them shooting fetid spit around, so it's a lot of sudden random target damage for your healer to heal off. Cooldowns are good, and having people use their personals and health potions anytime they get hit can also be good. With the boss at this little HP, we just focus him because he has less HP than the ads anyway, although even if he had higher, you would still probably want to do that since killing the ads would take a lot of extra time, and your DPS might taper off in this phase with all the movement. If you're at risk of this phase really dragging on, you might want to Bloodlust for Bone Maw. We're going to skip this pack of 2 spiders and 2 bats, which is one of the more annoying packs in the zone if you don't CC one of the mobs. Could be worth keeping in mind that out of everything we saw on this route, we skipped 6. Those 4 plus 2 ads at Sadhana. You might try skipping a different combination of 6. That brings us to the 2 void spawns. You need to have a very specific interrupt plan for these guys. They keep casting the spell Void Pulse that does a huge AoE to the group. It's 100,000. It's okay to have 1 go off. You really don't want 2 going off at the same time, and even 1 can't go off very often because your healer needs time to get people top back off. You want to focus 1 down as quickly as you can while making sure that that one gets interrupted every time, and you can let the other one go off once or maybe twice. as long as soon as the first one dies, you interrupt every cast. You're basically fine as long as no more than 2 go off. You may need to burst the first one down quite quickly depending on how many interrupts you have. I believe these 2 can't be skipped, unfortunately. I think you need to kill them to open this door. Once you do go through this door to Ner Zhul's room, be careful that he has a very large aggro radius. He'll aggro if anyone takes a step forward at all from the spot where you landed, so just keep that in mind if you have to do anything before combat. Ner Zhul is a fight that really benefits from careful positioning. He's going to drop these omens of death on ranged party members that do quite a lot of damage based on your distance. If you're within 20 or 30 yards of them, it can really add up. We try to never get one at the center, because if you do, it really zones out your movement possibilities. As long as they're all at the edge, range can move around the circle kind of neatly, while tank keeps the boss in the middle. As soon as you see where the first ritual of bones is, immediately go to the opposite side of the room. If there's still a pillar going off near there, try to stay away from it in the little area that you're working in. The tank will immediately take Ner Zhul and face him off the edge. As soon as the lane is opened up, the ranged and healers try to go through it. Be very careful not to clip the corner of the purple cloud, and we get to the edge again so that when the first omen appears, it tends not to be right in the middle. The tank and melee wait a little bit until a malevolence goes off, because the tank does not want to accidentally aim a malevolence down the corridor in the Ritual of Bones. If that all goes well, then we're right back in our positioning, where the ranged move the omens around the edge while the boss stays in the middle. If your positioning gets messed up in any way, and people can't maintain very good separation from omens, the pulsing damage really will start getting your healer behind, and people should be ready to help with cooldowns, or your healer should be ready to use major cooldowns. There's the second Ritual of Bones, so again, we quickly go across and take Ner Zhul right to the edge again while we DPS it down. 2 DPS may often be enough to take down the skeleton, especially if they have cooldowns up, so your melee might be able to stay on the boss. And again, we go through the corridor and quickly hook to the edge to get the first omen to drop here and resume our positioning. You should generally be able to kill him before the third ritual. If he's below around 15 or so when it starts, you should be pretty comfortable just focusing him. If he's higher than that, it may be safer to kill the ritual, but it also depends on your challenge mode time. If you're cutting it really close, you may just have to keep burning him and risk it. Like I mentioned before, this zone wound up being a little bit tight on time as we were practicing it. This run went cleanly though, and as you can see, there wound up being some cushion in our route. 30 seconds or so is what we had this run, and that's usually a pretty good way to do things. Remember some of the possible routing and mob count variations I mentioned based on your group, but in general I think this should be a very effective plan for a group trying to learn gold. Good luck in your own attempts, and thank you for watching.